This is the Advanced Discussion Show with your host, Aaron Wilson. We have a very special returning guest, James Lyons, former commander of the Pacific Fleet, and now Lyons and Associates, a global consulting firm. We call him Ace on the show. Welcome back, Ace. How are you today?
Nice to be back with you and your audience, Aaron.
I have some very poignant questions for you, very pertinent. We have an election coming up in 2016. What are your thoughts on, for the listeners and the voters, on what they should consider as we choose a very pivotal presidential candidate here to lead us out of this present quagmire we're in?
Well, we have a tough road ahead of us, and any new president has to have some really fundamental qualities and beliefs and willingness to follow through. As I'm sure most of your listeners realize, we're being challenged throughout the world. The Middle East is in a total chaotic situation. We have China challenge us in the Western Pacific and the South China Sea with their illegal actions, taking over land masses and islands that are claimed by other countries, and creating islands in international waters. Many of these are over 600 miles from the Chinese coastline, so that should tell you something. But I think getting back to some of the fundamentals, certainly I'm working on a new op-ed, and it's called The Litmus Test for the Next President. And part of those things, the litmus test, is he has to be a firm believer in our Second Amendment freedom of speech, which is being challenged from a number of areas, not the least of which is by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, who wants to make it a crime for anybody that criticizes Islam or their prophet Mohammed. And it's in their view, they determine whether you're insensitive to their 7th century mentality. And of course, we saw this recently with the great outcry over Pam Getler's cartoon contest in Garland, Texas. And it's really fundamental to our freedom of speech. You saw the senseless murders in Paris at the Haddo magazine for publishing a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad. So this has to be, the president has to be rock solid on protecting our Second Amendment freedom of speech. Also, he has to totally reject the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and it's known as the Istanbul process. It's been underway for 10 years. And of course, one of the candidates who has endorsed this unbelievable process is Hillary Clinton, which should just right at the outset totally disqualify her for any government position, let alone the presidency of the United States. I think one of the second conditions the next president must have, he must fully endorse President al-Sisi from Egypt's call for the reformation of Islam. We have to bring Islam into the 21st century. It's idiotic to watch the barbarism, the atrocities that are being conducted against all Christians, Islam, anybody that the ISIS or the other groups consider as infidels, and I'm putting aside the Sunni Shia sectarian violence that has gone on for 1,300 years. But we have to bring, this is just totally unacceptable, adhering to these standards established by the Prophet Muhammad back back in the 7th century and applying them in today's world. Makes absolutely no sense. Must be totally rejected. We have to, the next president must also immediately cancel sequestration. We have to restore our military capability. Our national security is being threatened by these senseless budget cuts when we're being challenged throughout the world. For example, our inability not to support providing defensive equipment, legitimate defensive equipment to the Ukraine to rebuff Russia's blatant aggression makes absolutely no sense. Excuse me. Immigration. The illegal immigration has got to be high on the agenda, and we must secure our border. And as you know, the Obama administration has fully embraced the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood's creed, for your listeners, excuse me, which I mentioned previously, was to destroy the United States from within by our own miserable hands and replace our Constitution with Sharia law. How any president could embrace the Muslim Brotherhood knowing that this is their creed is unbelievable to me. And what your listeners have to understand is there is no difference between Al-Qaeda, the ISIS, and Muslim Brotherhood. They all have the same objective, to take America down and replace our Constitution with Sharia law. So and of course, this current nuclear framework agreement that the Obama administration is hell-bent on executing with Iran must be thoroughly rejected by any legitimate presidential candidate. What it is a roadmap to ensure that Iran gets a nuclear weapon. And here's a country that's been at war with the United States for over 35 years, have caused thousands of American deaths. And your listeners should never forget that it was Iran who provided the key military training and material support to the 9/11 hijacking. Without that support, 9/11 could not have been carried out, and 3,000 innocent Americans would be alive today who were doing nothing more than just going to work. It's unconscionable of what we're doing. And I have to tell you, listeners, one other thing about this administration and this senseless nuclear agreement with Iran. When Obama received the Democratic nomination on, I think it was the 6th of June of 2008, no, the 3rd of June, he opened up a secret channel to the Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran. And the secret channel was Ambassador William G. Miller. William G. Miller was our former ambassador to the Ukraine, but more importantly, he also was in our embassy in Tehran and spoke fluent Farsi. And the message that he was sending to the Ayatollah Khamenei was, look, don't sign any agreement with the previous administration. Wait until I'm president. You will like my policies. You will see I am a friend of Iran. Now, how can this borders on treason? How can a president of the United States tell a country that's been at war with us, who has been whose greatest objective is death to America, and he's telling them he's their friend? I ask you, Aaron, does any of this make any sense?
No, sir, it doesn't. May I ask you then, is your understanding that Hillary Clinton will be pretty much more of the same then?
Oh, absolutely. She has basically endorsed the organization of Islamic State's objectives. This is unconscionable. So, to me, that just disqualifies her from the start. Hey, let me tell you one other thing when we're talking about Hillary and her emails. Obviously she broke the law. But more importantly, what your listeners need to know is that all our enemies were able to hack into Hillary's email. They have all the goods on her. She is totally compromised. She is damaged goods. There's no way she can be allowed back in the White House.
Yeah, that was very poor judgment on her part. I agree. Well, by contrast, Admiral, I'll let you collect yourself there for a moment.
Yeah.
Ace,
go ahead.
Ace, that pretty much rules out the Democratic Party because I think they're going full-fledged with her. Who do you like as a Libertarian or as a Republican candidate that seems to be the one that will cut these ties and get us out of these agreements? Basically, do a lot of undoing the work of this Obama administration. Who do you think is prepared to endeavor this restructuring?
Well, of course, it's pretty early in the process, as you recognize, Aaron. I mean, there are, Walker has said some solid things. Cruz has said a lot of the right stuff. But I'm not prepared at this point to, focus in on who I think would be the best one. The best one may not have even surfaced yet. It's pretty. This is almost a cottage industry. This election process, which I think somehow downstream has got to be shortened up. This 2-year effort we're into, and that we go through on our presidential election. Not that it doesn't deserve a full vetting, but I think with today's communications and everything, I think we can shorten the process up considerably. And let's face it, the office of the presidency of the United States is the most important office in the world. That office sanctifies really what freedom and democracy are all about. It has great respect. And unfortunately, for the last 6.5 years, that office has been tarnished by the current incumbent.
Okay, Admiral Lyons, let me ask you, please, what is your concern about Iran taking their yellow cake and enriching it all the way to 93 or 8%, whatever it is? Are you worried about Israel, or is there a greater threat with Iran having the ability to enrich to weapons grade?
Look, Aaron, there is no way Iran should be allowed to have any nuclear program. This is a theocracy that is bent on world domination, as is Islam itself. That's why I call for the reformation of Islam. But Iran has shown over the years of their continual desire to kill Americans and anybody else that stands in their way. I mean, we had from the time of Jimmy Carter's administration, when they took over our embassy in Tehran. We could have cut them off at the knees then. The plan we had was rejected by Carter. We had proof positive that the ones behind blowing up our Marine barracks, killing 241 of our finest Marines, and that was in October 23rd, 1983, and that previous April where they blew up our embassy using proxies, Hezbollah, and so forth. And over the years, the kidnappings and so on, when they were in a life and death struggle with Iraq, they still continued to conduct offensive acts against the United States. Over 1/3 of our casualties in our war in Iraq were directly attributed to Iran. They were behind. Without their support, they couldn't have, the 9/11 hijackers couldn't have carried out their attack. What makes you think at this point, if they ever are allowed to continue to possess the means to produce a nuclear weapon, that they would use it responsibly? Furthermore, they have no need for nuclear power. Their proven reserves will last only for at least another 250 years. So this nonsense that they need an alternative resource for energy is pure nonsense. I mean, what we've done, we've capitulated to them on every key condition. The only way to ensure that Iran is not going to have a nuclear weapon capability is a military strike. Unfortunately, we still have the capability to carry that out. And I'm under no illusion that this administration would ever do that.
Right, so you see a new administration would have to be willing probably to partner with Israel to accomplish that attack on the facilities, because we probably can't do it alone, and I'm sure Israel would want to help. So this is another part of the litmus test, isn't it?
Absolutely. We have to, look, here's what it is. We have a few allies in the Middle East. Let's face it, Syria and Iraq are fractured states. They will never be put back together again. The Kurds should be given their statehood. We should be providing direct military equipment to the Kurds. The Kurds, the Peshmerga, are tough fighters. They're respected, and they support what we want to do. The same way with Israel. We should be fully backing Israel, providing them with the necessary capability to carry out and protect their integrity. Now, in any sensible way, the new administration, as I previously said, got to immediately cancel this nuclear framework that President Obama is deliberately going to assign, which makes absolutely no sense. And then we have to be prepared to carry out, if Iran doesn't meet the original conditions set up by many UN resolutions to totally disable their nuclear infrastructure, then we must be prepared to militarily take it out.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, exactly. I think that's where that's the path. If they make a slip up and we catch them in some skullduggery, we have to be willing to enforce the penalty on them. That goes to their credibility.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's a pretty good analysis geopolitically of the Middle East. Can we please move to the Ukraine? It seems like there is a pretty good response to setting up sort of a new line in the sand with armor and training and maybe some spec ops in Eastern Europe. What are your thoughts on how things going forward there?
Well, I think we should be providing the Ukraine the essential defensive military equipment they need to ensure their territory territorial integrity. We have to hold Russia accountable for their blatant aggression in Ukraine. And, in Eastern Europe, while Ukraine is not a member of NATO, the weak response from the NATO nations, which in the United States provides the leadership for NATO, certainly has tarnished, if you will, some of NATO's reputation. So NATO has to forcibly here reinstitute its credibility as the finest defensive alliance that the world has ever witnessed and seen. And we should be pre-positioning certain equipment in Europe, along with anti-ballistic missile systems that the Obama administration had canceled. And we should, I think, we need to reestablish certain armored divisions and aircraft. We certainly need to reestablish a carrier, a naval carrier strike force in the Mediterranean, which we had for years, which was essential to maintaining stability and peace throughout the region there.
Oh, okay. I was unaware of that. Where was that based?
Well, you mean the carrier strike force? Would be a rotational force unless we home ported it somewhere in the Med. We have the Sixth Fleet flagship, the USS Mount Whitney, is home ported in Gaeta, Italy. But the carrier would be rotated in and out along with its accompanying ships.
And that would go up the Red Sea through Egypt, basically there?
Well, it would roam throughout the Mediterranean the way we've done in the past. You move it to where it is required. You conduct exercises with our allies, NATO allies. You conduct exercises with Egypt. I'm sure it could be a very key factor in helping to start stabilizing the situation in Libya, which is also a failed state, which I have to go back and point out to your listeners was the result of Hillary Clinton. And your listeners should be aware that the tragedy in Libya never had to happen. Actually, Gaddafi was our ally there.
Yeah.
The people he was conducting attacks against were Al-Qaeda militias. He was doing our job for us. And in fact, my good friend Rear Admiral Chuck Kubik, retired Rear Admiral Civil Engineering Corps, was actually fostering truce negotiations between Gaddafi and the AFRICOM commander, Carter Ham, when Hillary met with a Muslim Brotherhood representative in the Paris Westin Hotel for 45 minutes, and then canceled the truce negotiations, and over all the military and intelligence advice not to start a war in Libya, she rejected it all, and we are now with the mess we have today. And in fact, we lost, of course, 4 Americans, including our United States ambassador, as a result of her action and her failure to provide sufficient protection for that special mission compound in Benghazi. And of course, as I always said, her lying and the cover-up by this administration, I have always believed, and I said this on the Lou Dobbs show, that I believe what was supposed to happen, this was a failed operation. You remember President Morsi, when he was president of Egypt, when he came to Washington in summer of 2012, his number one objective was to get the release of the blind sheikh. And I've always said, to me, I think the Benghazi tragedy was a failed operation that Stevens was not to be killed, but was to be kidnapped and held hostage in exchange for the blind sheikh. And I've seen nothing so far that has changed my position on that.
Understood. Okay. Can we please now pivot to the Oriental waters there, the South China Sea? Our present commander of the Pacific Fleet, Scott Swift, 4-star Admiral, has quite a road to hoe, so to speak, with his limited resources. And they're, well, according to the recent story coming out, was that the U.S. Marine Corps doesn't have enough landing ships to really get much done should things escalate. What are your thoughts on what's going on there, please?
Well, of course, as I've said, it's a tragedy that we ever had to leave Subic in the Philippines in 1992, and what that did was create a vacuum there, which China quickly filled. In fact, the following year, they came out with a declaration saying, basically the entire South China Sea is their territorial waters. And of course, this is pure nonsense. This is illegal. This is their bullying tactics, and it really and it's the underpinnings for all their action is the massive military buildup they've had over the last 2 decades, in which they have double-digit increases in their military budget. In fact, your listeners should know they're building 60 ships a year against our 10 or 12. And what they've done is built a Navy to confront the United States Navy. Now, obviously, we cannot stand idly by here. We have to restore the United States Navy. The United States Navy today is down to something like 278 ships. And to put that number in perspective for your listeners, that's the number of ships I had under my command as the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. That's what we have in the entire United States Navy today, and we're heading in the wrong direction. In fact, we're going to wind up with the smallest Navy prior to not World War II, but prior to World War I. Now, what can we do? Well, as I said in the recent op-ed, we have to expand our relationships with our allies in the region. We're certainly moving in the right direction with Japan, but in the Philippines, we have to assist them in developing their facilities. We should be building installations on claimed Philippine territorial islands, the Palawan. We need to install certain anti-ballistic missile capability that should China go ahead and start using their facilities to conduct military operations, we'd be in a position to immediately take those facilities out. And I don't want to go into exact plans on how we would do that, but we need to have the capability in place, recognized, and that's what deterrence is all about. These islands that China are building, they're over 600 miles from the Chinese mainland. They're well within the economic zone of the Philippines and a number of other nations in the region. So their claims, and they refuse to submit to any tribunal. Anything, while they're signatories to the Incident at Sea Treaty, anything they declare as their territorial waters and territory is excluded from any international tribunal. Isn't that helpful?
So basically you're saying that we should start building on these shoals and islets and everything as well.
What I'm saying, we help our allies who actually have the claims to those islands and we can provide assistance and support and the military equipment that has to go in there so they can protect their legitimate territorial claims.
So we could provide naval security while they build on their territorial claims, and then we can provide additional armaments and stuff to protect those built up areas going forward. Yeah, that sounds like a good general plan.
Right. And we also need to transfer some modern aircraft to the Philippine Air Force so that they have a recognized capability. Right now, it really needs a big boost in capability.
I really want to ask you an important question, Ace. The state of our Navy, how it's sort of leaning towards this carrier-based model. To me, it could seems to be almost like the Spanish Armada with its big ships, and then you have the small British ships that kind of encircle it and take it down. Do you think our carrier-based model is outmoded? What do you think the strongest part of our Navy is then, if it is? Or what do you think about this sort of paradigm? Do we have any weaknesses because we're leaning one way or the other in our Navy?
Well, here, there's been a lot of that type of talk thrown out there. The carrier represents the finest battle capability in the world. With its air wing and it has a multiple role that it plays in deterrence, stability, projecting U.S. interest into an area. You don't do that with a submarine. You look out there at a submarine, all you see is the nice ocean. But when the carrier steams in, you have just sent a definite signal that the United States is involved. Now, what a lot of people don't realize, and I've put this out a number of times, you strike one of our carriers, it's like striking continental United States. We will come at you with the full force and capability of our U.S. military capability. More importantly, I know what you're probably getting to, China has developed anti-ship ballistic missiles. Well, I'm going to tell you, listeners, we have an algorithm and software which can totally neutralize the Chinese capability. And we need to get on and bring that into the operational environment. And it's a game changer, and you cut them down to knees. So technologically, we still have the capabilities to manage these threats if we move forward in a dedicated way.
And again, that's very much...
One other thing. We have to rebuild the Navy to a 400-ship Navy. There's no question about that. The Navy we have today is the Navy that Ronald Reagan built, his 600-ship Navy. It's now down to something like 278 ships. In the Clinton years, they lived off the peace dividend by just keep grading down the Ronald Reagan military. And this has to be reversed. Sequestration, by the way, must be one of the first things that the next president has to do is cancel sequestration, remove the budget caps on the military, and reverse a number of the social engineering that has been forced on our military.
This empire, this democratic promoting empire that we have, can't really exist without the top line Navy. It can't, Ace.
Say that again, Aaron.
Our Navy is a key to this empire, isn't it? I mean, it is the key to this empire, having a strong, top-of-the-line Navy.
I mean, we're a maritime nation. That's how we project power. Unless we control the seas, and which we stand for, open and free seas, stability, and we're not out trying to grab anybody's territory. The only thing we've ever ever asked from a country where we fought is a piece of land to bury our dead.
Do you see the?
Listen, Aaron, I'm going to have to get going here. You're just about ready to wrap it up with
Okay.
this now.
Okay, so again, we had very special guest, James Ace Lyons, 4-star Admiral, retired. His website, Lion, LIONLLC.com. Ace, can you leave us with a closing statement, please?
Well, I think, America represents the greatest nation in the world. And we have this exceptionalism about us. That's why everybody wants to come here. We have to restore our leadership as the leader of the free world and protect the fundamental rights that are embodied in our Constitution and expand that to areas where people are still being held down and subjected to acts of barbarism and atrocities that go back to the 7th century and have no place in the 21st century. And I might say I would like to see the Pope spending more time talking about the atrocities committed against Christians than he spends on talking about climate change. And with that, I'll close.
Thank you very much for your sage advices, Admiral Ace Lyons. I wish you well, buddy.
Okay, Aaron, you have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. Amazing tour de force of geopolitical analyses. And that zinger at the end on the Pope. You couldn't ask for any more. Amazing man. We could, learn a lot from him. He's 87 years old, but he's still quick as a whip. And he has some really good plans there. I mean, some good general framework, a litmus test for the next candidate. Sounds like Hillary Clinton is not going to be it, and there's a great undoing of certain aspects and working with the present policies, as we saw with this, how we're going to deal with Iran. If they do, sign this agreement, and then, of course, we have to marshal that agreement and make sure that it's lived by and no slip-ups. And so really a firm hand dealing with them, working with our allies there in the region. And then, of course, this idea to rebuild the Navy, adding basically about 30% to the existing aging Navy. Wow, that's huge. It makes a lot of sense. Sounds like about 50 or 100 billion, but that's money well spent. And like I said, the empire cannot exist on a dwindling Navy. The vacuum will be filled. It looks like China wants to fill that vacuum. We have ways of getting it done one way or the other. South Korea is a great shipbuilding nation. So is Japan. And so that alliance, well, we're really seeing an alliance come between Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, and South Korea. We could see, because they all have claims on these South China Sea territories, we could see this sort of new paradigm developing there. Those countries against China and whatever other allies that want to align with them. I'm not sure who else really wants to go with them, and there's sort of arrogance. So I really think the Asia pivot is consuming all of our resources and putting us in naval speaking, the maritime assets. And so with all of that focus there really and needed there, exposes us to weaknesses in other parts of the world, like he was mentioning in the Mediterranean detachment needed to patrol that area. That thing would be circling around the Mediterranean all on very important missions, whether it's Libya, Israel, or to the north as well. So very interesting analysis, I think expert analysis by Ace. And of course, again, his website to go to, he has a business that he runs. It's called Lion Associates LLC. The website is lionllc.com. Go ahead and tell him you heard this great interview on the Aaron Wilson Show, AARONWILSON, and that you'd like to hear more. So we can come back on the show. He knows your positive feedback, and he'll come back on the show, and we can hear more of his sage advices. Thank you very much for listening. It's the Advanced Discussion Show, signing off.